everybody, this is Matt from Chez Pascal and the Wurst Kitchen, coming to you today with a little lesson on knives. As you can see, I have quite a collection of knives here, but what we really want to talk about are 4, maybe 5 basic knives you should own. If you're really interested in cooking, you should invest in knives, keep them sharp, take good care of them, okay? So for me, as a chef and a professional cook, as I traveled, I seemed to collect knives. And at a younger age in cooking, I watched other cooks, I saw them with their knives, different style knives, and I was impressed by that. And I said, hey, this is kind of what I should be doing. I should be investing in knives. Each one has a different purpose, and each one, or most of them, have memories associated with when I purchased them, much like my cookbook collection. Way back when, 1994, worked in Holland, was amongst a lot of young cooks who were going to school there. I was fortunate enough to be able to travel there and work as an intern, and I saw them with all these great knives, and I said, really, I should check this out. So my first big purchase on a knife was a knife by Global. Now this is a version of a Global knife. Now unfortunately I don't have the original that I purchased, but this is a Global knife. It's a stainless steel. This knife really is designed for vegetable cutting. Also there was a great place in France that my boss told me about in Paris called de Hilleron. And this is like, when I walked in there, I didn't even know what to do. I was just blown away by the copper, by the knives, the cookware. There, I was told about carbon steel knives are basically like owning a classic car. You need to maintain them. You basically own them because it's something you just want to have. They sharpen easily, but the steel is very hard. They do oxidize. You have to take care of them. So some examples of the carbon steel. These are in the middle here. I have chef's knives, and a chef knife, we'll get into it in a little bit about why it's made and what you do with it. But some of the carbon steel knives are here. They all have history. This one here was from my grandmother. Broken tip, but we fixed it. I don't use it as much. It's just a great memory of my grandmother. This chef's knife here, purchased in probably the 2000s on a trip. We used to do cooking demonstrations with Holland America line. One of the cooks was using a knife similar to this. He said, you're going to Halifax, this is the knife you want to purchase. So this one, just again, a great memory of those trips. Over here, this is the cleaver. Everyone needs a cleaver. Whether it's to cut meat, cut bones, or perhaps you need to cut kindling. Cleaver. This one, California, San Francisco, working at Oliveto back in 1996 in the North Beach area on Columbus Ave. I have no idea if the store is still open, but this one came from there, as did this. This is a flexible, this is really for fish. It's meant to get under the fillets, onto the bone of the fish. Another purchase from California, great memories. This was out there as well, yard sale special, just getting into butchering. So this one had a lot of meaning to me. This was $2, people, I still have it. Style of bread knife, another grandmother's knife. I never use it, but it's cool, and someday I will. Couple examples of more bread knives, serrated knives. This one was from Montreal. We used to do these great chef trips. We really aren't allowed to talk about those trips. All I have to say is as soon as we got there, we went to brunch, Oped de Couchon, and they only served alcohol. So you can imagine how that weekend went. Now we're getting into some slicing knives. This one is all-time my favorite knife. If I could use it for everything, I would. Hollow ground. It just feels great in my hand. I just love it. This is a slicer. Not as flexible, not hollow ground obviously. Another purchase from Holland where I learned to fillet salmon. Had to do tons of it for an event they were doing. Purpose of this knife was just for that. These types of knives, another butchering knife, scimitars, just a must-have. This is a bony knife, nice flexible. I like the wood handles. I like the way they look and the feel in the hand. Another slicer, Opinel, just because they make awesome pocket knives. Never used it. Someday I will, but super flexible. I'm thinking someday when I make my prosciutto for slicing it off the bone. That's what this is for. Another grandma knife. Pretty beat up. Old Henkel. but I love it. So now I'm going to clear my cutting board and we're going to talk about 4 must-have knives. So let's get into the 4 knives I think you should own. Those being a chef's knife, a bony knife, a good paring knife or a small utility knife, and I do think a good bread knife is important to own. Typically a chef's knife is our utility knife. We use it for almost everything, or can use it for mostly all the vegetable cuts, slicing, dicing. And you can see perhaps there's a bit of an arc here. And the reason is because when you're chopping maybe a lot of herbs, you can rock it back and forth. You keep your fingers on the end of the knife, rock it back and forth. There's lots of different varieties of chef's knives, thicker heels, thinner blades. What I look for is you really need to feel it in your hand. It's got to feel comfortable, well balanced. I don't like anything that's over 8 or 9 inches long because I feel like you lose the control when you're working with the knife. So I have 2 that I go back and forth from on a daily usage in the restaurant. This knife here and my knife here. Now, you can see the handle. That's really what attracted me to this knife, and it matched one of my chaperons. But turned out to be a great, love this knife. I even dropped it carelessly, broke the tip. Luckily, it still functions, so I'm still using it. I like this knife because it's really thin. It makes great dice mincing. But if I'm chopping herbs, I then go to this knife, which you rock back and forth. So as far as a chef's knife, just think about what you're mostly doing in the kitchen and what you're looking for. So now we're into the bread knives. I look for one again that's not too long. I like to have control of the knife, and that's based on how I hold it, the length of the knife. Again, a bread knife, you're not using it all the time, but when you need it, man, is it important to have. Especially if you're making bread, which seems to be a very popular thing to do these days. It's good to have a bread knife that can cut through that. Another knife are paring knives or a small utility knife. Sometimes this knife, they might call it a small vegetable knife, mincing shallots, mincing onions, perhaps mushrooms. Paring knife, same thing. I mean, I think it's so important to use a paring knife when you're cleaning garlic or if you're peeling onions. Perhaps you want to flute mushrooms, which no one really does anymore, or tourneing vegetables. That's what a paring knife is really good for. Again, it's just something that you need to have. You'll find a use for it and you'll be glad that you own it. The 4th knife that I think one should own, we're talking about bony knives. Okay, now why do we need bony knives? Because if we're going to be filleting fish, if we're going to be breaking down or deboning chickens or ducks, it's just, again, it's a knife that won't really set you back financially, but it's something that really should be in your drawer of knives just to have. I like one that's slightly curved. It's somewhat flexible, okay? So you can get around some of the joints, the wishbone on the chicken perhaps. I like it to be, this is probably about a 6-inch because you really want to have control when you're working through butchering and feeling those joints and the bones as you're separating. 2 other versions are for fish. Okay, you can see again, old carbon steel. This one, you can see the little pitting on here is because it wasn't properly maintained. This is more of a knife of a memory for me, more than one that I use on a regular basis, but it's very flexible, you can see. So you can really get into the carcass on the fish and not leave any of its meat behind. I like the wooden handles only because I like the way it feels in my hand, but they make ones with plastic handles. I mean, again, purchasing knives, in my opinion, is like collecting cookbooks. They have to have meaning. You have to remember where you bought it, why you bought it, and they become part of your family. So now that I have my bony knife, we're going to use it to break down some poultry. And you'll see that in an upcoming video. So now that you've purchased your knives, in my opinion, the most important thing is keeping them sharp. What we have here on this cutting board, this is just a honing steel. It's used just periodically to keep the edge on your knife. If you don't want to sharpen your own knives or don't know how, there's plenty of videos online to learn. I like to use water stones for sharpening. You can find those numerous places. We'll provide some links as to where to find some knives that we like and a place to get some sharpening stones perhaps if you're really interested in doing it yourself. Otherwise, take it somewhere to have it sharpened. It's really important. Sharp knives are so much better to work with.